We should mention the Harry Potter films. Did you know at the start what direction that character was going?
People think I knew a lot, and I didn't. When I was asked to do it, there were only 3 books written. And so, by and large, I was learning with the readers. Every time there was a new book, basically, I was just going, oh, I'm still in it. Right.
Did it feel like a kind of mad situation?
It was a very changing thing, of course, as it would be over 10 years. Apart from anything else, 3 leading actors start out at 12 years old and then they're 22. Meanwhile, CGI is growing up along with you. So at the beginning of it all, we used to go off on location. Forget that by the end of it. You know, we were in a pile of old grass around at the back of Leavesden Studios with a big football stadium of lights. And I will never forget, on the last film at 3 o'clock in the morning, Michael Gambon staggering up this piece of old grass, looking at me and saying, "Am I dead in this scene?"
There's that danger and that unpredictability, and the unpredictability is in so many of your characters, that sense that one never quite knows. I mean, it's one of the things that makes them so compelling.
They're outsiders. That's what makes them interesting, and that's where the drama is. Hamlet's an outsider. King Lear is an outsider. And that's where the drama is.
But it does mean that it's precisely that kind of displacement that means that these characters, you never quite know how they're going to react in certain situations, and that's one of the things that, you know, make it very uneasy to watch. And I just wondered if you had experience of that, you know, from early on, observing that in other people.
Yes, yes, I've seen it in other people. It's like the men in Nil by Mouth. I wasn't one of them, but I'm fascinated by them.
And these are, I know Nil by Mouth is not exactly your own story, but based on things that you knew.
Yes, it's somewhat autobiographical. Yeah, yeah. But those men are, they've always fascinated me, and I was always very quiet. I was always the observer.
Chris Columbus found the kids for the Potters, and I was able to just create. What we do as directors is we cast everything. Yeah. We cast, the actors are crucial, you know, clearly, because they allow us to interpret everything. And then we cast our DOP, our costume designer, every member of, everyone who comes to build that world with you. You've decided upon, you know, to bring with you on that journey. And in my experience, is the people you give the fewest notes to, you've made the right choice. Yeah. And if you've got an actor you're sort of noting all the time, you've obviously maybe made not the most perfect step. So for me, it was partly coming home to work with in a world that I was sort of very fond of, but it felt very different and very fresh. And also the stories going forward that Joe's writing, they're all resonant with political themes and ideas, and my television work was full of, you know, dealt with politics quite a lot. So you know, it's really about the rise of the right. It's the rise of and the sort of seductive nature of power, and how all the sort of things that we take for granted are much more fragile than we realise. And that's ultimately, and she was developing that long before the last 12, 16 months, when so many of these things,
wow, yeah.
You know, and ironically, some of the things that she wrote in those early Potter books, that you kind of thought, well, this is kind of quaint, and sort of, you know, they're actually sort of starting to feel frighteningly real.
Yeah, I was just like,
in a strange way.
With my work with Mike Lee over the years, you spend a hell of a lot of time on backstory. You start from the ground up. So if you've got an already ready-made script writing, I just go backwards and take it right down and down and down and down. And particularly if it's a challenging character and somebody who's either a pariah or not very pleasant or loathed, or even sometimes loved, or sometimes both, I want to know where it's coming from. I want to know what they, and I always end up thinking, what were they like before they had each layer of sophistication of adulthood, and what were the things that made them this grown-up person? You know, what is their fallibility and what is their preoccupation? you've also got to be aware of the technical structure of the way a film works. It works in a rhythm. It works as a group of people coming together to tell a story. It's not just about you. In fact, you are the last important. It's the character, putting your character in that story, and will the audience who are watching it get it without seeing what all the tricks you're trying to bring to it, all the things you do. If you're going to be egotistical, if you're going to be unpleasant, if you're going to be, why bother with that when, you know, often people behave like that when they're insecure. I'd say, look, everyone's insecure. They look like they're not, but everybody's scared, right? Particularly actors, because they don't know. You're in a vulnerable position. You come with millions of ideas. You don't know if they're any good. You don't know if they're going to end up in it. So everybody's scared. Hold your, you know, just be kind. Keep your concentration. Think and use your imagination. And remember, you're not the only person there. Really, you're not that important. It's the audience is the most. It'll often cut all the old bullshit out. You know?
So, and of course, rumbling on under all of this is Harry Potter. We've not mentioned so far, and of course now the last one is there, but you had been you'd been there right from the beginning. And who was to know until we got to the end that actually the whole story had really been not about Harry Potter, but about Voldemort? The psychological complexity, it's all, that's it. It was his story. That was we really wanted to know about him at the end.
Well, that was, I was actually, this came through, a lot was to do with Mary Selway, who... Casting director, who I had a huge regard for and produced The Wuthering Heights that we talked about earlier. And she was an amazing force as a casting director. She was a brilliant, sorry if you know this, you may know this, but she was very caring about actors. She was very tough and honest, but wonderfully sensitive to actors and the nature of casting actors and perceiving what they might do. And she was very persistent. I have to say, the proposal of being the Harry Potter, I was totally ignorant of Harry Potter. I didn't know the books. I hadn't seen the earlier films. But then this approach was made about playing the key villain, and it was really Martha, my sister, said, "Oh, you must understand, this is huge. You know, all the children, her children, are into Harry Potter. You really have to take this seriously." But actually, it was Mary and Mike Newell, the director, who I'm working with now again, and the Davids, David Heyman, David Barron, but principally Mary, who pursued me. And Mary was, I have to say, she wasn't well. She wasn't well, and she died shortly afterwards, very tragically. But I was very affected by her tenacious approach right into the sort of, when she was really not in a good way. And that really moved me. And something about the flame of Mary being determined to get me to play Voldemort sort of pressed a trigger in me. Alongside actually seeing designs for the look of Voldemort, which I thought were fantastically striking, sort of the shaven, the bald head and the no nose, and the whole look was attractive.
And in a sense, I mean, I was partly joking, but in a sense, when you get to the final film, since Harry never has huge distance to go psychologically, you know, he's a good guy at the beginning, he's a good guy at the end, pretty much, it's Voldemort you want to know about, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think that Voldemort's probably rightly used quite economically, that, you know, he's so high definition Mr. Evil that you don't want too much. Because, I mean, whatever way you cut it, there's a sort of, you know, it's larger than life quality to it.
The question is to do with the fact that you guys really went out on a high with this last one. Yes. I want to, you know, aside from the fact it got the best reviews, made the most money of all of them, it was successful by every measure. But you said an interesting thing to at least one interviewer that I came across while preparing for this. Quote, "I think it," referring to Deathly Hallows Part 2, "is just light years ahead of any of the others in terms of filmmaking, in terms of acting. It's like the emotional range of Shakespeare with the action and blood of Tarantino."
Yeah, yeah.
And I just wonder if you can expand on, you know, this final film, which is really still being celebrated now as things come to a close.
It is, and I was so proud of the last film, and I haven't been pleased with all of them particularly. I mean, I've been very
and openly critical of my performance in the 6th film. I hated it. I'm a very harsh critic of these films. But I was so pleased with how the last one came out. I found it hard to believe that we made it at the same time as making part 1, because it's so far ahead of even of that. I couldn't have been more pleased with it.
Part 7.
But sorry.
You said same time as part 7?
7, part 1.
Oh, part 1.
Yeah,
sorry. I'm
yes,
sorry. Yeah,
I don't know. Some people call it 8. Some people call it. I don't know. We filmed it all in one go. Yeah, I mean, it was the one that I really felt like I got somewhere close to where I wanted to be with it. So I was pleased that so many other people felt the same way about the film, and it's very hard to, and I know that there were a lot of very cynical people when the decision was announced that they would be splitting the book up into 2 films. A lot of people said, oh, well, that's to, make more money. And you just think, well, if you, all the people that made that criticism, I wanted to say, okay, well, you adapt it then into one 120-page script, if you feel you can. I mean, taking that time in the first film to, really set up the story meant that when we got into 7, because it's an action film, but David is having to tie up all these loose ends at the same time. It meant, splitting the film meant that when we got to that last part, we could just go at 100 miles an hour the whole time. And I was thrilled with how it came out. I didn't know what I was going to feel. I was so nervous going to see it. I was just terrified. Because then this is it. That's it after that one. I don't get any more chances. So I felt I kind of got close on the last one.